Zeno was someone who lived centuries before our time, and he's generally considered the founder of a school of thought that would later have a big influence on how people think about personal growth, tranquility, and living a meaningful life. You might find it interesting that he started out in the family business, which involved trading purple dye. That alone might not sound like the kind of background that leads to philosophical greatness, but it was actually crucial to his development. His father used to bring home all kinds of literature from distant places, including the city of Athens, and these readings opened a door in Zeno's mind. Through these books, he discovered a deep love for wisdom. He became curious about human nature, the cosmos, and how a person should conduct their life. What really changed everything was a dramatic event. Zeno ended up in Athens after a shipwreck, a disaster on one level, but something that turned out to be a life-changing opportunity. Stranded in a city famed for its philosophical traditions, he decided there was no better time or place to learn about the mysteries of existence and the art of living well. He walked into a place where books were sold and asked for directions to those who taught the sort of wisdom associated with Socrates, a figure he admired greatly. At that very moment, a philosopher named Crates happened to pass by, and the bookseller directed Zeno to follow him. That serendipitous moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in Zeno's life, as he became Crates' student and immersed himself in a discipline that encouraged stripping away superficial comforts to unearth deeper truths. Crates was part of a tradition known as the Cynics. If you've ever heard the phrase living like a dog, it was in some ways an allusion to how the Cynics led their lives. They aimed to question social norms and push back against material excess. They weren't interested in building grand theories about the universe so much as they were committed to living in accordance with nature, and that meant embracing a simple and often severe existence. They slept on the bare ground, owned barely more than the clothes on their bodies, and begged for what they needed to get by. Not many people had the stamina for such a lifestyle, but those who chose it believed it was a path to genuine freedom. By discarding the usual concerns about wealth, social status, and possessions, they felt liberated from the anxieties that plague so many. Cynics were also known for clever commentary on society. One cynic famously asserted that if you marry a beautiful partner, you might end up sharing them with others, while if you marry someone less conventionally attractive, you might feel like you've paid too dearly. They had a knack for harsh but witty observations about human behavior, urging people to reconsider what truly matters in life. These remarks could sound cynical in the modern sense, but they were intended to jolt listeners out of complacency. They wanted people to reflect on their desires and question whether social conventions really brought genuine happiness or merely fleeting gratification. One particularly famous figure within the Cynic tradition was a philosopher known for living in the most austere conditions and scolding those around him for chasing comforts. He believed the gods had given humans the straightforward means to be happy, namely meeting fundamental needs, yet people insisted on complicating life. He pointed out that art objects or statues designed just to please the eye might cost vast sums of money, while a simple staple of barley flour, which could sustain life, cost almost nothing. He thought it madness that people would willingly make life miserable by obsessing over luxuries when real peace of mind was within reach, if only they would control their impulses. Zeno, however, realized during his time with Crates that he wanted more than just an extreme lifestyle. He was hungry for an understanding of the theoretical framework behind the quest for a virtuous life. Although he respected the Cynic drive to live simply and reject social norms, he believed that a more systematic understanding could strengthen a person's ability to adhere to these principles. He thus branched out to study logic and other disciplines with different philosophical teachers around Athens. This led him to a unique fusion of ideas about how one should live, drawn from the Cynics, and concepts from other schools, which offered more depth in theoretical matters like logic and the nature of the universe. Eventually, Zeno established his own school and started sharing his blend of practical guidance and philosophical theory with those who sought him out. He would speak in an open-air hallway adorned with impressive paintings. Because he taught in that space called a stoa, the people who followed him became known as Stoics. One of the truly appealing aspects of his school was that it kept certain core insights from the cynics, like the belief that a simpler way of living is often superior, but also allowed for some creature comforts, provided you didn't let them own you. For the Stoics, the key was to be able to walk away from those comforts at a moment's notice without feeling any real deprivation or suffering. Stoicism gradually took shape around three main areas of focus. The first is logic, which is all about refining your capacity for rational thought and argumentation. Stoics believed what sets humans apart from other creatures is rationality, so they spent a lot of time examining how we think, how we can avoid being misled, and how we can communicate more effectively. The second area is physics, which for them included not just understanding how physical objects work, but also delving into the nature of reality, the existence of divine forces, and our place in the grand design of the cosmos. The third area, and arguably the most vital, is ethics, how you should conduct your life to achieve what was referred to as eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or a well-ordered spirit. For the Stoics, living a good life was about more than following moral rules or social conventions. It was about living in alignment with your deepest nature. Just as a perfectly functioning tool does precisely what it was made to do, humans, according to this view, should strive to follow the path our capacities direct us toward. We have impulses similar to other animals, hunger, desire, and so forth, but we also possess reason, which distinguishes us. By using reason well, we discover ethical duties, caring for relatives, engaging with our communities, and carrying out roles in society that benefit others. The Stoics believed that by developing excellence in this domain, by being what they called virtuous, you'd find the best possible version of yourself. However, the perfect embodiment of Stoic ideals, a wise individual who never lets external circumstances upset them, was acknowledged to be exceedingly rare, almost mythic. The idea of such a perfected person served as a guiding star for students, a model to aim toward, even if they'd never completely attain that level of wisdom. This notion is comparable to other traditions that hold up exemplary figures, not necessarily because you're expected to match them, but because striving for that ideal can inspire you and keep you moving forward. One of Zeno's students, named Cleanthes, took over the school when Zeno passed away. Later, another influential figure propelled Stoicism to new heights. Over time, the philosophy made its way to Rome, largely through the efforts of a teacher who managed to captivate several prominent Romans. Roman society was incredibly practical and interested in governance and public affairs. Stoicism eventually took root there, albeit with some modifications. Romans showed less interest in the purely theoretical areas of logic and physics, channeling most of their energy into practical ethics. They were drawn to the guidance Stoicism offered on personal well-being, emotional control, and fulfilling one's social duties. Among the Romans, there arose a particular emphasis on managing your internal state, what you might call your emotional life or sense of tranquility. While Greek Stoics had already touched on how calmness was a natural outcome of wisdom, Roman Stoics brought this aspect to center stage. People under Roman rule lived in a time of considerable social upheaval, political intrigue, and personal risk. So the promise of a reliable method to remain poised during crisis and maintain peace of mind had widespread appeal. You can see evidence of this if you look at one particularly notable Roman Stoic who became an educator to many. He constantly reminded his listeners not to be driven by events they couldn't control, but instead to channel their efforts into the one thing they could truly govern: their own choices and mental states. By mastering how you interpret events, you could free yourself from unnecessary anguish. This approach has resonated throughout the centuries with anyone who has found themselves overrun by stress, fear, or anger. The Stoics recognized that real peace of mind didn't involve turning into an emotionless statue. On the contrary, they believed that certain emotional responses, such as joy, were entirely compatible with living in a rational way. What they discouraged were destructive emotions like rage, despair, envy, and anything that sprouted from mistaken beliefs about what truly mattered. The key was to recognize that external circumstances, your wealth, reputation, even personal relationships, might be swept away at any time. If you hinge your sense of well-being on things outside your direct control, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and turmoil. By contrast, if you learn to appreciate external things without clinging to them, you can remain steady whether those things stay or go. This isn't to say you should never enjoy what life has to offer. The Stoics frequently stressed that there's nothing wrong with savoring life's good fortunes, like a comfortable home, tasty food, or warm companionship. The challenge is ensuring those pleasures don't become chains, restricting your peace of mind. They like to point out that the more you need a certain possession or situation to feel okay, the more power you've actually given away. In their eyes, autonomy and rational freedom were of utmost importance, and anything that interfered with that was a red flag. You might be wondering how logic fits into all of this, given the emphasis on ethics and emotional self-management. For the Stoics, sharpening your reasoning skills was essential for protecting you from the mental pitfalls that lead to distress. They studied different forms of argument, paying attention to how a conclusion follows from its premises, and examining how easily people can be tricked by subtle or manipulative arguments. If you can train yourself to see through faulty reasoning, both in your own mind and in the speech of others, you gain another layer of defense against delusions that could make you miserable. Physics, on the other hand, might seem even more distant from the core of how to live a good life. But the Stoics felt that understanding the nature of reality provided the context within which ethical reasoning flourishes. They believed the universe was governed by an intelligent, providential force, though different Stoics had different views on exactly what that meant. Some talked about the idea of a cosmic rationality or fire that permeates everything. By contemplating the grand scheme of existence and recognizing your place within it, the little irritations and temporary setbacks you face could shrink in importance. When Stoicism reached Rome, it took on a form that was especially practical. Rather than spending a lot of time exploring advanced logic or detailed physics, Roman Stoics focused on offering direct advice for everyday dilemmas. How to handle grief, how to respond to insults, how to keep your composure in moments of public shame, or how to withstand major life changes like the loss of a fortune or the death of a loved one. Their teachings were aimed at busy people, officials, merchants, soldiers, who needed to keep it together in unpredictable environments. Tranquility became a notable talking point in Roman Stoicism. While earlier Stoics treated tranquility as a natural companion of virtue, Roman Stoics explicitly highlighted it as one of the main rewards of moral and intellectual improvement. As they saw it, when your behavior is guided by values and your judgments aren't clouded by fantasies about what you can control, an inner stillness naturally appears. You don't waste energy wishing for impossible outcomes or imagining all kinds of catastrophes. Instead, you focus on the present moment and do your best with what is in your power. Take the example of someone who invests years in a business, only to see it crumble due to factors beyond their control, maybe a drastic market downturn or an unexpected disaster. A Stoic approach would say, yes, it's devastating to lose your income, but real damage happens when you interpret that loss as irreparable or see it as the end of your worth as a human being. If you have the clarity of mind to remind yourself that your character and capacity for judgment remain intact, and that these are the true assets in life, you can adapt. You might feel a sense of disappointment, but you won't be destroyed by it. You can pick yourself up, start anew, or find another way to contribute. Critics sometimes accuse the Stoics of not caring about others or about the real world, but that's a misunderstanding. The Stoics definitely emphasized community obligations and the need to act ethically within society. They simply argued that if you let other people's judgments, or the unpredictable nature of political and economic conditions dictate your mental state, then you'd become a slave to those circumstances. By maintaining a solid internal foundation, you can actually become a more helpful friend, neighbor, or citizen, because you won't be swayed or immobilized by every emotional storm. You can keep your bearings even in challenging times, thereby offering stability and assistance to those around you who might not have the same grounding. At the height of the Roman Empire, Stoic ideas influenced not only private individuals, but also political figures. You might recall stories of those who refused to compromise their principles, even if it led to their downfall or death. In their eyes, a short life of integrity was preferable to a long one of moral surrender. Others found a balance, engaging vigorously in political life, writing letters and essays packed with Stoic insights, or giving public speeches that urged citizens to cultivate self-control and a sense of duty. In the centuries after the Roman Empire, Stoicism went through ebbs and flows of popularity, but it never really vanished. Parts of it merged with other traditions, and certain texts survived that kept these teachings alive for future generations. Today, many people discover Stoicism through reading personal writings of a famous emperor who wrote down reflections about how to stay ethical and untroubled amid the burden of ruling a vast territory. His private notes were never meant for publication, yet they have become a timeless guide for those seeking composure and purpose. You might be wondering how Stoicism compares to other ancient philosophies. One major alternative was Epicureanism, which taught that pursuing pleasure, properly understood, and avoiding pain were key to a fulfilling life. However, Epicureans believed pleasure was best found in a life of modesty and knowledge, not extravagant indulgence. This sometimes led to the notion that Stoics and Epicureans are opposites, but in some respects, they share common ground in their preference for measured living and emotional equilibrium. The reason the Roman Stoics stressed tranquility might be partly because it was an effective selling point for the practical-minded Romans. While the Greek Stoics believed in the power of rational understanding and saw tranquility as a byproduct, Roman Stoics realized that many people wouldn't leap at the chance to become more virtuous for its own sake, but they could be enticed by the promise of a calmer, happier life. And once learners were on board, they would discover that true tranquility actually required virtue, thus pulling them in deeper. Over the years, competing schools also tried to gain followers. Various philosophical groups might combine ideas to attract new students. Some took bits and pieces from multiple traditions to create a more appealing package. This wasn't just intellectual curiosity. It was also a matter of survival for these schools in a marketplace of ideas. Even Zeno, at the foundation of Stoicism, wove together threads from the Cynics, the Megarians, and the Academy in Athens to formulate a cohesive doctrine that he believed offered the most robust and appealing path to wisdom. When you consider how Stoicism continues to be relevant, it's partly because many people today can relate to the desire for emotional balance. Even if they don't think of themselves as philosophers, they deal with anxiety, anger, fear, and sadness. The notion that there's a method, grounded in centuries of practice, that teaches how to handle these states of mind can be extremely compelling. The ancient Stoics taught very practical techniques, reminding yourself that certain worries are beyond your power, learning to pause before reacting emotionally to events, and consistently questioning your own assumptions about what you need to be content. One such exercise involves imagining yourself in a future scenario where you've lost what you value most. This might sound depressing, but the Stoics believed that occasionally visualizing worst-case outcomes helps reduce the shock if something like that actually occurs. If you train your mind to handle difficult possibilities, you become more appreciative of what you have and more resilient should adversity come. This practice has modern parallels in therapy and personal development programs. Stoics also focused on reframing stressful situations. Instead of labeling an event as entirely negative, they suggested examining it from different angles. Could it be a chance to grow in patience or humility? Could it reveal something about your own limitations, prompting you to become more resourceful? While this doesn't mean lying to yourself or pretending everything is wonderful, it does mean not automatically seeing challenges as disasters. This reframing can significantly affect how you experience and navigate life's hurdles. If you asked a Stoic how to handle everyday nuisances, like heavy traffic, a demanding boss, or a friend who cancels plans at the last minute, they'd likely advise, figure out which parts of the situation you can influence and let go of the parts you can't. No amount of frustration will speed up the traffic if an accident has blocked the road. No amount of anger can instantly change your boss's personality. But you can decide how you want to respond to these aggravations. You can decide to remain calm, treat others with courtesy, and find a constructive solution if one exists. If none exists, you can focus on protecting your own inner balance. In their framework, that approach is not passive or fatalistic. It's actually quite empowering because you're choosing your response rather than having it chosen for you by external events. Another aspect that sets Stoicism apart is that it sees real ethical living as intimately bound up with your sense of peace. You aren't just following arbitrary rules, you're living in a way that's supposed to bring harmony between your actions and your deeper nature. You're a social creature with the capacity to reason, so living ethically means using your intellect to figure out your responsibilities to others and to yourself. Neglecting those duties leads to internal conflict. Fulfilling them leads to an intact conscience and a profound sense of calm. People sometimes assume that aiming for tranquility means never getting involved in anything complicated or messy, but Stoics would say that's a misunderstanding. Some Stoics took on active political careers, fought wars, or dealt with huge societal challenges. They believed that as long as you kept your inner compass oriented toward virtue, you could engage with the world in very challenging roles without losing that sense of calm. This might require mental discipline, continual self-reflection, and maybe occasional retreats to regain composure, but it didn't mean living as a hermit or avoiding all risk. Over time, the Stoic community produced a number of individuals who have become legendary for their poise in extreme circumstances. Stories of their choices have been passed down precisely because they showed that Stoic principles aren't mere theories. They can be lived out, even under enormous pressure. Some Stoics faced exile, prison, or threats to their lives, yet maintained their dignity and sense of perspective. Their letters and personal remarks often reveal how they managed to keep a level head. Sometimes they remind themselves that we're all mortal, that we can't keep hold of loved ones or possessions forever, and that the best we can do is treat each moment as an opportunity to do something honorable. In contemporary life, you can apply these ideas in your own way. Maybe you're navigating a demanding job, family responsibilities, or personal setbacks. According to Stoic insights, you can reflect on what truly lies within your control, your judgments, your priorities, your willingness to learn, and your moral actions. Everything else, other people's opinions, random events, shifts in the economy, your boss's personality, or even your own health to some extent, lies partly or entirely beyond your direct command. If you center your mental life on what you can shape, you're more likely to experience steady fulfillment. When turbulence arises, you won't be immune to sadness or anger, but you'll recover much faster than if your sense of self-worth is tied to things you can't guarantee. This doesn't mean Stoicism is a magic solution for all life's troubles. Even the ancient Stoics acknowledged that living in this way requires practice, self-examination, and the willingness to notice your slip-ups. It can be frustrating at first because old habits of worrying or fuming over slight inconveniences can be deeply ingrained. But with time, many practitioners find themselves increasingly able to maintain composure in the face of setbacks that used to shake them. They become more patient with others' flaws, more aware of their own limitations, and more focused on what they can contribute rather than what they can gain. Because Stoicism has become accessible to modern audiences, you might encounter various techniques recommended by different authors or speakers. Some people keep a journal where they note their strong reactions during the day. They reflect on whether those reactions helped them or harmed them. They ask themselves if a shift in perspective might have led to a more constructive response. Others adopt a morning routine during which they remind themselves of Stoic principles. For instance, you might say, "Today, I'll meet all sorts of people with different moods and agendas. I can't change them, but I can control my own response." This kind of mental preparation can reduce surprise and irritation throughout the day. There's also a common suggestion to practice voluntary discomfort once in a while. This involves something like skipping a meal or taking a cold shower, not as a form of punishment, but as a way to train your mind to handle discomfort gracefully. The idea is that if you can face small difficulties willingly, you develop resilience for larger ones. By familiarizing yourself with how it feels to be hungry or cold, you become less anxious about those states. This freedom from unnecessary worry is what allows you to live more fully. Another point Stoics emphasize is the distinction between actual events and your judgments about those events. While an external occurrence, say someone cuts you off in traffic, might be momentarily startling, the long-term stress you carry about it is something you create in your own mind. By learning to see the gap between the raw facts and the story you tell yourself about the facts, you can rewrite the narrative. Instead of, "That person cut me off because they disrespected me," you could say, "Maybe they're rushing to an emergency. Regardless, my job is to stay safe and keep a calm head." Repeatedly applying such reframing can reshape your habitual responses over time. Stoicism also deals with mortality and the fleeting nature of life, urging people to keep in mind that every day could be their last. This isn't meant to be morbid, it's meant to highlight how precious each moment is. If you understand that your time is limited, you're more likely to spend it on worthwhile pursuits and less likely to get bogged down in petty resentments or trivial complaints. You may find yourself saying what needs to be said to loved ones, or trying that new endeavor you've been putting off because you fear failure. The recognition of life's impermanence can free you from procrastination and pettiness. It's also worth mentioning that Stoicism, especially in its Roman form, is very much about being an active member of society. You take part in life without becoming so entangled in worldly affairs that you lose your sense of self. Stoics weren't monks renouncing all worldly duties. They were often key contributors to their communities. They served in government, wrote speeches, crafted laws, and tried to steer society in a direction aligned with reason and virtue. Their sense of tranquility coexisted with significant responsibilities and challenges. This is why the tradition remains appealing to people who want both inner peace and outward engagement in modern times. If you're drawn to Stoicism as a way of managing stress or finding deeper purpose, it can help to keep a few pointers in mind. First, be patient with yourself. Real change in mindset doesn't happen overnight. Second, remember the core principle that you can't control everything, but you can control how you respond in thought and action. Third, if you slip into old patterns of worry or frustration, treat it as a reminder to revisit your motivations, adjust your perspective, and keep trying. Fourth, cultivate a sense of gratitude. Even small gestures, like noting what you're thankful for at the end of the day, can reinforce the Stoic idea that life is a gift, and many of its good things are out of your own hands. Recognizing them can reduce the sense of entitlement that leads to disappointment. Additionally, don't be surprised if elements of Stoicism remind you of other philosophies or even some religious teachings. Themes like humility, self-control, compassion for others, and finding a center of calm within turmoil are quite universal. You might find parallels in Buddhism, certain Christian monastic writings, or other wisdom traditions. While Stoicism developed its own distinctive approach, it's helpful to remember that insights about human nature often converge across cultures. In short, if you were to extract the essence of Stoic advice, it would probably revolve around living with an awareness of what's truly up to you, your decisions, your interpretations, and your moral intentions, and learning not to cling to what isn't. It encourages you to approach life's challenges as opportunities for growth, to handle success with grace and failure with resilience, and to treat other people with fairness and understanding while maintaining your own integrity. Through such practice, Stoics believed you not only become a better person, but you also experience a profound sense of peace that comes from aligning your life with your highest principles. Sometimes people assume that to practice Stoicism is to become detached in a robotic way, but that's not actually the end goal. Feeling passion for good causes, delight in loving relationships, and awe in the face of nature are all compatible with Stoic thought. The difference is that you try to experience these passions without letting them dominate you. You remain aware that any external condition might change, but you also trust that while circumstances may shift, your capacity to choose a noble response endures. Stoics did make it clear, however, that if you wanted to claim you were following their path, you had to practice. It wasn't enough to read about it or recite certain lines. You had to remind yourself of these principles in daily life, perhaps in the face of adversity or trivial annoyances. Over time, These repeated efforts to remain composed, reflect on your reactions, and revise your thinking would gradually shape you into someone more steadfast. By integrating logic, Stoics sharpened this process because they saw that many of the destructive emotions people experience are rooted in faulty thinking. If you manage to weed out contradictions, biases, and ungrounded assumptions, you're less likely to fall into despair or rage. And by understanding the broader workings of the universe, what they called physics, you cultivate a sense of perspective about your place in it, which further supports calm resilience. Eventually, the Stoic tradition in Rome led to a whole library of personal reflections, letters, discourses, and handbooks that offered advice on everything from interpersonal relationships to surviving exile. Some of these works have come down through history, passing from generation to generation. People find them relevant enough that they continue to appear in modern languages and are read across the globe. In your own life, you can adapt these principles in ways that make sense to you. If you do a job you find stressful, you might take a few moments each morning to mentally rehearse potential stressors, reminding yourself you can't control the marketplace, your boss's mood, or the attitudes of coworkers, but you can control the sincerity and diligence you bring to your tasks. You might also rehearse what you will do if something goes wrong, a deal falls through, a client is angry, so that if it happens, you've already prepared yourself not to be knocked off balance. This exercise is sometimes called negative visualization, but in Stoic practice, it's a tool for fortifying your mind rather than cultivating pessimism. Likewise, if you struggle with comparing yourself to others, wishing you had your neighbor's house or your colleague's popularity, a Stoic viewpoint helps you see that external markers of success don't necessarily translate to genuine flourishing. They can vanish overnight, and they don't guarantee you're living in a way that's consistent with your higher faculties. Placing too much value on them can become a trap that leads to envy and discontent. Stoics invite you to measure success by how well you adhere to principles that you sincerely believe are noble: honesty, fairness, perseverance, and kindness. Admittedly, the world today is quite different from ancient Athens or imperial Rome. We have technologies and systems that old philosophers couldn't have imagined. Yet the basic human condition, the presence of desires, fears, relationships, society, remains remarkably familiar. We still grapple with wanting control where we have none. We still worry about what others think, and we still face losses and setbacks. Stoicism remains relevant precisely because its core insight, the distinction between what is and isn't within your power, and the guidance to care for what truly is, can address modern anxieties just as much as ancient ones. If you decide to explore Stoic thought further, you may find yourself adopting small daily rituals that ground you in these ideas. You might write down each night a brief gratitude list or a short reflection on what you handled well and what you could have managed better. You might share your experiences with a friend who's also interested in self-improvement. You might catch yourself in the moment of frustration, pause, and redirect your thoughts more constructively. While these steps sound modest, practicing them consistently can lead to a real shift in how you experience life and how you handle difficulties. Stoicism doesn't demand that you abandon all pleasure or that you become indifferent to human connections. In fact, many Stoics believed strongly in forming bonds with others, supporting loved ones, and contributing to the community. They simply believed that you should not become enslaved by these attachments. If you rely too heavily on external circumstances to sustain your contentment, you risk heartbreak when those circumstances inevitably change. Instead, by cultivating an inner resilience, you can love and participate freely, without fear that loss or change will utterly undo you. It's a journey that never ends, a daily practice of returning to the core Stoic insight. Keep your focus on what you can genuinely influence, your own choices, and learn to let go gracefully of all the rest. By doing this, you won't become heartless. Rather, you'll discover a deeper kind of compassion, both for yourself and for the flawed but fascinating world you live in. And over time, you might notice a growing sense of serenity, even in the midst of life's inevitable storms. That serenity, the Stoics taught, is the natural outcome of living in harmony with who you truly are and what you're truly capable of.